Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. And I'm your host, Isaac Levin. And if you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow us wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you know anybody or you yourself would like to be on the show, feel free to reach me on Twitter. My handle there is IsaacR11, or reach out to me on Mastodon. My handle there is IsaacR11 at fossadon.org. All right, so with that out of the way, coffee's getting a little empty, but that's okay because I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I was talking a bit in the green room, and let's just get right to it. So my guest today is James Access House. James, you want to say hello? Introduce yourself.
Hey there, everyone. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, do you want to maybe give people a little bit of intro as to who you are?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm James. People know me from getting angry with people on Reddit,
Sure, sure,
swearing on Twitter, and
sure.
writing ImageSharp. That's probably the three things that people know me about, and
Yeah.
maybe breaking code sometimes.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all break code. Like if anybody says they don't have bugs or they don't have to debug a lot, they're just lying, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this conversation just because I love talking to open source maintainers about stuff. And one of the things that I also love to talk about is like how folks got started in tech. So like tech origin
Mhm.
stories is really fun for me. Like, did you realize at some point in time in your life that like, hey, I like this technology thing. Like maybe I can make a career out of it. You know, like build some passion around it. Like when did that happen for you?
Well, yeah, mine's a bit funny, my one. I grew up with computers around me. My dad used to make little adventure, look, you've walked into a room, it is dark, those kind of adventure games, walk through ones with the Commodore
Okay,
64 years and years ago.
really?
So we always used to have computers around the house. But he did that kind of on the side. He was actually a psychology lecturer, but he did computer games on the side. Um, but we always had computers around the house, so I was always comfortable with the computer. Uh, but I never ever considered a career in it at all. I didn't realize really that you could. Um, but I was backpacking years and years ago in Australia, where I am now, and I was in a lift in Melbourne in the city centre, and I saw this advert on the side of um, inside the lift. They had like this little screen and
Sure.
it said C Sharp developers $300 a day or something it was. I
Oh,
thought, oh, that's a lot of money. I could take that. That'd be
yeah.
great. And I thought, well, I'm comfortable with computers. But I also thought, I really want to live in Australia. And at the time, I was just backpacking and I had this temporary visa. And I thought, if I could learn to code, then I could be on the skills list and get to, live in Australia for real. Right? I can apply for a visa and get to
Hmm.
live in Australia for real. So when my visa expired, I went back to Scotland at the time. I sat for a year and I just read everything I could and tried to learn how to code. I started with VB originally
Hmm.
um, because the curly brackets were scary. So I started with,
Okay.
with VB. Genuinely, right? I couldn't, I was like, there's too many brackets. I can't do this. So it's VB. And I learned with better that. And the first thing I kind of ever did, there was a blogengine.net. I
Okay.
think Mads Christensen, it was his thing.
Okay.
That was in C sharp, but what I did was I ported it to
To
VB, and it was
VB.
the first thing I ever kind of learned how to do. And I built my own blog engine. I guess that was a kind of rite of passage. Um, and I spent all my time always reading people's blogs and learning and getting through and just trying to become comfortable doing it. But what I found very quickly was that it worked for me. Like,
Hmm.
I guess some people good at picking up instruments, good people, can play golf immediately or stuff like that, but writing code for me, my brain seems to work in a very structural way. And I went, oh, I understand this. I mean, there's still stuff computers are magic, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
Sand that talks, right? So I don't really
yeah.
understand most of the intricacies like some people do. But actually given them computer instructions, and if you give them the right instructions, they do the right thing for you. That made perfect sense. So I was
Yeah.
like, right, okay, that's it. And I've got a good memory, so I'm very good at remembering APIs and what they do and things
Oh,
like
okay.
that. So it came very quick. I got my first job within a year from dead start teaching myself in a room. Spent
Wow.
5 years working as a front end developer. Was desperate to, you know, do the back end stuff more. So Um, Picked up open source, started doing. I did a library actually, image processor, which was just this wraparound
Sure.
system drawing. That was something that I started doing because every single example of how to do something with system drawing I could find whenever I needed one. Because I
Yeah.
was working for a company that was building a cinema website at the time, and we needed
Oh, okay.
thumbnails and stuff. Every single example was wrong. Like it was leaking memory, something was doing something
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
So I wrote this thing that wrapped around. Now a lot of my stuff was wrong as well, but at least it was wrapped around in a
Yeah.
pretty fashion. Um, yeah, so I did that and then learned enough to be able to. The whole purpose, the entire purpose of me learning to go was so that I could get a visa and come back to Australia, right? Thankfully, I really, really, really enjoy writing code.
Yeah.
So it allowed me to learn it well enough to apply for a job in Australia and then eventually get sponsored and be able to move across.
That's
Yeah,
great.
so it's a weird one. Like
Yeah, but
there was a set purpose, that was, but thankfully it turned into something that I don't know what I'd do if I didn't write code.
sure.
It,
So, I mean, what's fascinating to me is that it was like learn C sharp. Like
it
it could have been anything. It could
could
have
have
been
been
like
anything, yeah.
learn Fortran, learn COBOL, right? Like,
Cobalt, yeah, yeah.
yeah, right. And then like what, however many years later, your entire trajectory changes, right? Like just
Mhm.
because you came across an advertisement, right? That's great. So this happened, I'm guessing after, did you go to university, or is this after like you
I
were in
did
high school?
university, but I didn't. I did zoology at university, so nothing related
Okay.
at all. Like a complete flip. Nothing related to this at all. I didn't think like I don't know. I'm fairly old. I'm 43 now. So back then, I think they did Ada. I think the language
Yeah.
that's what they taught.
Yeah.
That's what they were doing at the university at the time, and I think that was used by the Navy or something. I had no interest in that.
Yeah.
So these things, it's not like now where computers, I mean, they were ubiquitous. I'm not that old. They were everywhere, but
Sure,
it's
sure,
not the
sure.
same. Like, it's not the same as it is now. Like, computers are everywhere now. Everything is, on a computer. Like it's an obvious career path now. You can go, well, there's definitely something in this. But back then, for me, my exposure you know, to computing just wasn't there. So, my school had like two computers and that was it,
Yeah.
in this school I went. So it wasn't a thing that you thought, well, there's definitely a career in writing code. So I never went that way until much later. I was 28 when I started writing code.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, Ada was the first programming language that I learned as well in university, and I think like the professor said something like it's used by like the train system in Paris or something like that. Like
Hmm.
it's very, I guess its implementation is like very good for like infrastructure related like embedded
Yeah.
systems. Um, and I just remember like it being a very stark jump from like that to C++, which was kind of
Uh,
like the next programming language that I learned, and I was like,
oh,
I
well.
I, I don't know if I could do this. Um, but yeah, like I mean, so there are a lot of things I want to unpack, but I want to talk firstly about like the zoology degree, right?
Hmm.
Um, obviously, did you work in zoology at all, or was it like
No, no,
no?
no, bombed out.
Okay,
I ran out of
okay,
money eventually. I never even finished the degree. I
okay.
got to like the final year and I got sick, like just around about the exams, like properly sick,
Yeah.
and I couldn't sit half of them. So I
Okay.
went to repeat the year, like so my final year, wanted to repeat it, and then I couldn't get the funding from the
Oh,
government. They said no. So that was it.
that
I
was
had
it.
to get a call center job and you know kiss that like part of my life goodbye. So I didn't do anything with it. But funny enough, like I still know people from the university days.
Sure.
There's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
one person who works in the field, and that's it.
Sure.
Everyone
Sure.
else went off and
Well,
something
I,
else.
I know I know somebody who got like a I don't think they got a biology degree. I don't know if they got a zoology degree,
Mhm.
but like they work in a zoo now, and they very much like it's
Yeah.
impossible to find a job like at a zoo or
Oh,
like
even
yeah,
back then I knew.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
even back
Uh,
then I knew it was.
but I assume that you probably still probably like if you said mentioned you had a good memory, so I imagine that like you go to you go to the zoo or whatever or the aquarium and you just like, oh yeah, that's blah blah blah. Like you know,
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm
yeah,
awesome. I'm awesome to walk
you're
along to the
probably
zoo.
you'd probably be a great tour guide at a zoo.
And I love to tell you what, I've got a thing about aquariums, right? I can't visit a city if they've got an
Oh,
aquarium, I have to go to
oh
it.
yeah, oh yeah.
Every
I'm the
single
same
city
way.
I've ever visited with an aquarium, I always go to the aquarium because I love them. I love them. I
Yeah.
think all the fish, all the stuff. I just sit in my own glass and that,
Yeah, it's
brilliant.
I'm a very similar way. Like my wife and I every place that we've ever lived, we've had a zoo membership, an aquarium membership. We love to go
Hmm.
to museums. We just like touristy things, even if it's in a city that we live in. So here's a question
Yeah.
for you, not related to tech at all. Like you say, you go to an aquarium everywhere. What's the best aquarium you've ever been to? And I'll say mine,
Um,
because I've been to a lot of aquariums too. So I'll say mine after
yeah.
you say yours.
Okay, Paris.
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 Paris is good,
We
huh?
went to Paris for a work. It was amazing. Work Christmas. The job that I had in Scotland, they took us to Paris for the weekend. Incredible weekend.
Yeah.
Everyone else was in restaurants and pubs and stuff. I dragged one of the developers to the aquarium with me.
Hmm.
We went around that, but it was great. They had carp at the end of it, and you could put your fingers in, and they
Yeah.
nibble it. I loved
Dude.
it.
Oh, that's
Absolutely loved
fun. Yeah, the best aquarium that I've ever been to, it's in the States. It's in
it.
Monterey, California. So
Yeah.
the Monterey Aquarium. It's not a huge aquarium, but it's just very well put together. And they
Yeah.
have hammerhead sharks there, which I'd never
Ah,
seen
nice.
before. So
Nice.
that was
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
They used to actually, I guess, years ago they used to have a great white there, but
Oh my.
the enclosure was too small. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so, but yeah, like that's yeah. I mean I could talk. This show could be completely about aquariums and zoos, but like let's talk a little bit more about tech, right?
Yeah.
So you started out learning you liked VB because you didn't like the curly braces. Have you gone like down the F sharp route like very much like
Honestly, uh,
it's yeah, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts like as somebody who wasn't 100% sold on C sharp, so they liked VB a bit more. They even did practical stuff in VB. So like when you see like more functional programming like without curly braces like
mm,
F sharp or Python or any of those, like what
yeah.
do you like when you see them? Are they less interesting? Are they more interesting because of the curly brace? Like I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Oh, I'm gonna make a few enemies here, I think.
No,
Um,
no, no, no.
I think F sharp looks like hieroglyphics. I cannot pass it. I just
Really?
cannot pass it. I've looked at it. I've looked at examples calling my own APIs, my own stuff. I'm like, how does this work?
Yeah,
Like, I just can't crack it. I haven't put the time into it, right?
sure. Yeah.
But people have written examples, and I'm like, no, no, I just can't get it. And I've tried, right? Tried to like there's if you're writing something in C sharp now, which I'm super comfortable with, I love C sharp. Like
Sure.
it's by far and away my favorite language now, and it's always improving. Um, when you're writing stuff, you sometimes hear complaints from people, rightfully so, in the F sharp community that certain things aren't easy to write in F sharp because they're
Hmm.
designed with C sharp in mind, right?
Yep.
And you
Sure.
get the same with VB as well. There's certain things just missing from VB, like the unmanaged keyword and stuff like that, right? Um, so I try to think when I'm writing stuff, you know, is that possible in F sharp? And I've tried to put that effort in to learn enough about F sharp to make sure that I'm not making life difficult for people that do it.
Sure.
I've
Sure.
never managed to learn it. I just can't grok
Interesting.
it. I cannot get it. I'm just like, nah. And Python's white space dependent or something. So that's an absolute no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything that I can break by putting a space in the wrong place, that's just scary. Like
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
it's funny because I've tried to learn F sharp a few times too, and I think
mm,
in maybe this just goes to like kind of me being too old, maybe like the cliche like old dogs and new tricks thing, but like I get it's like I'll be banging out something and then I'll like this is probably way easier to do in C sharp, so I'll just
mm,
stop, and like
yeah,
I know that's like not the point of the exercise. The exercise is to learn a new language, right? Like, yes, obviously doing something in C sharp for me, or probably for you, is much easier because you have more familiarity with it. You know,
yeah. I mean,
like a lot of
it's
the
just like
syntax, you
writing
know, the
in.
keywords, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it's for whatever reason, like I'm in the process of learning Go right now. And
Oh yeah.
um, it's just like I'll be going through like some sample and I'm like, man, this is like way harder than like writing it something in like .NET, but only because I don't know Go very well. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to like expand my way of thinking. It's really hard, man. It's
Yeah.
really
I think
really
that I
hard.
think there's language feature differences and stuff though that really help. You know, like I mean, I know F Sharp has generics and stuff, but and Go's just got generics, or they
Yeah.
have generics now. I can't remember, but
Yeah. So I believe there's generics now, but there was a long time where it didn't have generics in it. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Whereas, you know, we got it what C Sharp 2 or 3 or
Two.
something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, there's things in C Sharp that really lend to making things easy to write
Sure.
and read
Yeah.
more importantly. Like I find C Sharp super easy to read,
Hmm.
unless the code's been written by someone who's a mathematician,
Sure. Sure.
you know, because they just use single variable and keys for everything.
Yeah, like
Um,
they like if there like there's writing code to solve business problems, right?
yeah,
And there's
yeah.
writing code to replicate math algorithms. And
Mm,
those two are very different things, and they don't overlap very often, right?
no,
Like if you
well, yeah,
like, if you ever go to like any of these like learning how to code like code test websites like Leet Code or whatever, and
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
oh, we want you to some principle, and it's like you look at the answer and it's like reversing an array with like, and then it's like it's just a bunch of just like moving like bits around, right?
Pretty reverse.
Yeah, exactly. Or you could do string inverses. That's so
Yeah,
like this isn't like a C sharp fan like podcast, but like I will say like the idea of like having basically like an extension or a method that's managed like that's built and maintained by a ton of people is
hmm,
substantially like very very valuable to me as a developer, right? Like I don't have to
absolutely.
reinvent the wheel constantly. And I know
Mm,
like other languages like Python and Node and Java and Go and whatever have like tons of community work and tons of big companies investing in it, but like I don't know, maybe it's just because I see so much of the C sharp world that
yeah.
I'm just like, man, like C sharp developers have it really, really good.
They do. They really do. Like honestly, we got fantastic ideas and the choice of them now. Visual Studio gets better and better, and you know, Rider is extraordinarily good as
Yep.
well. Like so, you've got two of them, and now we've got the dev kit for
For
Visual
VS
Studio
Code, yeah.
Code. Yeah, I've got to be honest. I'll probably never use it, but it's there for people,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
You know, for the stuff I do, it's. I don't think it's going to be suitable for me, but I think for a lot of people, fantastic. You know, there's great choices for people. You know, the debugger is incredible. You know, and then you got things like the what's that, the time traveling stuff, so you can go back. Like, I broke something last night when I was writing some code. I really broke everything, but I was able to step back and
Yeah.
find something. I was touching memory I shouldn't have. Um, but I was able with Visual Studio to eventually figure out what I'd done. You know, and I don't think you could do that with the other in other languages to the same degree. I don't understand how people get by with other languages and ecosystems sometimes.
Sure. I
They
mean,
they manage
especially,
it,
yeah, especially
but
people
I
that
don't
live
know
in
how.
multiple, right? Like, I'm always
Yeah.
very fascinated by the people that like maybe like they use their backend as like .NET or Java or whatever, right?
Mhm.
But then they also like know a bunch of front end stuff. Like, oh, I
Mhm.
can Angular and Vue and React. I'm like, how do you know both of those things? Like,
It's okay.
I very much was like the full stack developer thing when that was really popular, like that phrase. I'm like, that doesn't exist. There's nobody who can do
Yeah.
both of those things successfully because I personally can't do those things successfully.
Nah.
Um,
Well, I started off as a front end developer, so
yeah,
I'm still pretty good at all but I'm old school with that now, right? So
yeah,
I know JavaScript, I know CSS, right? I can code up most things with both. Um, but I've never ever learned one of those frameworks ever. I always
yeah.
just I wrote
Or
my
like,
own years ago. I wrote a front end framework years ago. Like I did one that was like a bootstrap style thing, but at the
okay,
time it had accessibility and all these things built in that bootstrap didn't. Bootstrap covers all that stuff now. It's
yeah,
fantastic.
sure.
But I wrote one years ago, and so I was good enough to do stuff like that. But now I've never learned any of the framework. Like I don't have the capacity in my brain to do it, or the
Yeah,
interest, to be honest with you.
it's
Like,
crazy too because like all this stuff has just changed so much. Like
yeah.
I still like if I need to wire up something like Flex Grid and like all those like these new like it's not even new anymore, but it's like these more
Yeah,
modern like
yeah,
CSS practices, right? I have no idea how they work. Like okay, I just know that like this is the class that does this. Oh, look at that! Like now I have a table that's like evenly dispersed. It's all
yeah,
magic, right? It's all
yeah.
magic.
Well, I think the people that write the CSS specs need to have a good hard look at themselves sometimes and just think, you know, is this actually approachable and accessible and
Sure.
usable? Because
Yeah.
it's so cryptic and complicated and oh gosh, I mean, you can't remember who can remember the grid syntax? Who can remember Flexbox off the top of their
Sure,
head?
sure.
I,
Well, now
I,
you
I
have,
never will. Like,
yeah, well, now you have so great, like, you have really good IntelliSense or like co-pilots that,
yeah,
like, you just say, oh, I want this, and it gives it for you, right?
yeah, that
Um,
helps.
so you mentioned that you were like a front end developer and you're doing
Mm,
CSS and JavaScript, and then, but you wanted to like do back end work. Like, what
yeah.
was so interesting about back end work? Was it like,
Well, I mean, for one, I mean, at the time, we only had like IE,
sure, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
Firebox and stuff. It was horrible. Somebody would come with a designer would be like, I want this thing with rounded corners, and you were like,
Okay.
okay, okay, I'll see what I can do. And you were
Can you
doing silly
move can you
things with
move this
spacer
can you move
gifts
this
and stuff.
like button, like can you move it like 6 pixels left, but like
Yeah,
I don't want it to like look weird if I resize the page. Yeah,
and
fun
I need
times.
this email to look right everywhere. No, like it's a really hostile, and it still is, right? Even though browsers are slowly converging over time, really, because everything's Chromium. Um, it's still an incredibly hostile environment, right? We've got viewport sizes through
Yep.
unlimited. There's no change. So, um, and new features arriving all the time. It's the most hostile environment I can think of for someone
Yeah.
to code into. You basically you write this stuff, you write your standards compliant, and you are not guaranteed it's going to work everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But at least with a server-side language or something like that, backend language, you can write it and it'll
Sure.
work unless you're
Sure.
doing something crazy like you're making you're not actually making sure the size of something is the size of something on a 32-bit versus 64-bit system and stuff
Yeah.
like that. If you're doing kind of crazy stuff like that and you're not doing that right, yeah, that's going to break, right?
Yep.
But if you're just writing sensible, safe code, it just works.
Sure.
It's no problem and it's nice and it's right. Plus, you get to do good, powerful things like the stuff that I do now, the imaging
Yeah.
stuff. Like I can, there's Canvas in the browser. Why would I ever want to play around with that stuff there? There's a million libraries that do clever things with maths, and I'm no mathematician at all,
Sure.
right? So that's all dealt with. That's all done. Whereas in that server side, you're nicely cushioned in the fact that you've got a safe environment and you can write really, there's unlimited stuff that you can write. You're not constrained by anything. If you're writing a library, it can be anywhere. It can do
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, especially now with .NET like running everywhere for like the last 4 or 5 years, right? Like really proper .NET running on Linux, running on Mac, running
Mm,
on refrigerators, running on televisions. Like it's
that's it.
great, right? Like and I want to talk about ImageSharp in a bit, but I'd love to
Mm,
kind of get your thoughts. Is like, you've been a .NET developer for a bit, right? So you went through
mm.
that transition of it going
Yeah,
from
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like Windows only to now kind of everywhere.
Mm.
Like, what was your initial reaction? Was it like, oh, like now I have options? Was it kind of like, oh, now I have to learn Linux and like I have to buy like a MacBook Pro? Like, what was your initial thoughts when all that stuff sort of happened?
Well, see, right, because I was already kind of terminally online, and
Sure,
and
sure,
and
sure, yeah,
I watched the NBC team doing their thing. They were there. They tested that water first. They did that work, getting out
yep,
there and doing stuff in public. And I saw the license changes, and I was a big fan of people involved in that process, and I was following everything they were doing. And I could see it coming, I
yeah,
knew it was going to happen. And then when they announced it, I was sitting there punching the air. I thought this is the best day. I was
yeah,
so excited for it all. I thought this is just awesome. Like because I'm really invested in this ecosystem. Like
yep,
I'm very fortunate that that add-on the thing said C sharp, right? But I'm really invested. I think .NET and the ecosystem, everything around it, like sure, we're not as good at open source as other places and blah, blah, blah.
sure,
Right? That's fine. That's growing. That's changing, right? And there is a mindset that's changing. There's still people in the world that put the dollar symbol when they write Microsoft and stuff like that.
sure, sure,
These troglodytes out there. But I was heavily invested in this and I was super excited because I could appreciate, how much effort people, and I'd seen how much effort people who worked at Microsoft had put in to make this happen. Like they'd done so much work to that. It opened that up and it opened up just a world for me as well. I was like you said, I could suddenly write something and know it was
yeah,
going to be, it could be anywhere almost, like anywhere .NET runs. if I wrote something appropriate, it could be anywhere. And it was
Yeah.
exciting. It was really, really
Yeah.
exciting for me. I thought, this is great. And, there's teething, there's still teething, there's still things that don't quite work or things were obsolete, definitely for good reason, that haven't traveled across one thing in particular. But,
Sure.
but and it's still a long journey. And I still think that Microsoft and .NET are still very early in this journey. 10
Sure.
years from now, framework hopefully won't be a thing,
Yeah. I
hopefully.
mean,
It'll be that one server that's sitting in a cupboard that everyone's afraid to turn off,
sure, sure, sure.
That's probably hopefully the only thing running it in 10 years. But it's still an early part of the journey and they're still teething, but it's incredible. The rapid work, the stuff that's happening now. This was the stuff I was hoping would happen, because I think it's
Mm.
what, 2014 now, I think it was when they,
Yeah,
they,
it's
they
been
announced this. A long
it's
time
been
now,
a
9 years
time,
now.
yeah.
That was all the stuff that I was hoping that would happen. And you can see these
Yeah.
blog posts. People are getting excited when Stephen Taub does his performance whenever
Sure. Yeah,
the
yeah.
book of Taub. It's incredible, right? You read this thing and you think, wow, these guys are they're doing
Yeah.
amazing things. So yeah, I was super excited when it happened, and I'm still more excited now, um, because everything they're doing directly benefits me
Sure.
directly.
Yeah, yeah,
All the
yeah.
performance stuff, I'm like, yeah, free
Yeah,
bird.
exactly. And with that, like, let's talk a little bit about kind of your people know you in the .NET ecosystem as, you maintain a fairly well-known, fairly highly used, like, set of projects, right? So do you want to talk a little bit about them?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll tell you why I started it all, to be
Sure.
honest with
Yeah,
you, right?
exactly. That's a
So
great way to
so
start.
so
Yeah.
right. Because and this is where this is where the community at the time did kind of disappoint me a little bit. I'll be honest, right? Um, when Core was announced, when it was .NET Core and it was announced and whatnot, they said very clearly early on that system drawing was not going to be part of the APIs that they were working on. And that's because it's very tightly tied, to the Windows
Yep.
GDI APIs, right? So um, there was no way they could do that without completely rewriting it from scratch.
Sure.
They had an attempt later, a few years later, because Enterprise wanted something, and then they pulled back. But at the time, uh, they said no. This isn't happening for system drawing. And they were
Mm.
right. Like, it's
Sure.
mental, like, to
Yeah.
try and build something that works and does this sort of thing. It's a crazy thing for someone to attempt to do. Um, but because I had this library image processor, right, which all it is a fluent API that wraps around a few system drawing things and
Hmm.
normalized stuff. I hacked the GIF encoder so it allowed animated GIFs and stuff,
Yeah.
and better quality things. Um, But I had this library that was kind of semi-popular at the time. People thought I knew what I was doing, and
Sure.
and said a few people were like, "Oh, you could write something, couldn't you, James?" And I was like, "No,
No. Yeah.
no, not a
Yeah.
chance. I don't know how this stuff works." Um, but I saw conversations in the issue trackers on the runtime repo. It was something else at the time. It was they migrated to the runtime, wasn't it? It was called something else at the time.
Something else. Yeah.
Yeah, but I saw these conversations where people were like, we need to do something. Then we should all build graphics APIs. I thought, great. I'd love to get involved in that and actually just learn and maybe help out. And it could be a
Yeah.
big community-driven thing and whatnot. So I thought, well, tell you what, I'll make a start. I hoped people would join in,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they didn't.
Really.
They didn't.
They're like, this is
They
great.
didn't.
Let's just use this, right?
Yeah, yeah, and,
Yeah.
it was terrible for a while because it turns out right now I had a now this has come back to bite me over the years, um, but I definitely think it was actually the best decision I've ever made with the libraries. Um, I decided it was going to be managed. All of it was going to be managed. Now, most graphics libraries they pull in all the codecs.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
go, all right, well, I'm doing PNG. I'll wrap around libpng, giflib,
Yep.
uh, libjpeg turbo, all these things, and they patch it all together and they do that. And it's warts and all. Like if there's, if the API on that doesn't allow the flexibility they need, you get what you get. Um, and it's a black box once you pass that line.
Sure.
You go, okay, I'm calling the codec. That's it, gone.
Yep.
Now I was like, no, I'm writing this all in C sharp. So, um, I started porting codecs across. Now, I think that's the best decision I've ever made because initially there were performance issues, obviously, because we didn't have the APIs for all the SYND stuff and all that. It didn't exist.
Yep.
And even now, there's still, well, pre-Net 8, there were still problems on things like mobiles because the mono compiler has trouble, with things. Um, but I can now match performance-wise or even beat, in certain circumstances, all these codecs.
Sure.
Plus, I know how it all works. And I can control the entire thing from, reading the bytes to turning it into this
Yeah.
this buffer of pixels. Like I can control that thing, which means I can optimize that path
Mm.
all the way through for one. I've got an actual complete ecosystem now. I've got, I'm in control of every single thing this thing does. And if I need to optimize a certain pathway, then I can do it.
Sure.
I can do that. If I need to change something or support a new feature or not, we just write it. Like, there's nothing, I'm not messing around and I'm not depending on something else.
Yeah.
A really good thing recently, which I was so pleased about, was there was that big vulnerability recently with libwebp,
Yep.
right? And everyone's scrambling to update. Didn't affect me. Didn't
Interesting.
affect me in the slightest. We got our own version. We wrote, I've got a managed version that wasn't subject to the same vulnerabilities because, managed code gives you an advantage there, a massive one, that unless you're doing, messing around with APIs that specifically call themselves unsafe,
Sure.
you get the safety, you get the backing and the worst thing you can get is an out of range exception,
Yeah.
and then you sanitize and you fix that and that's fine, and but um so that was it's made things difficult for me over the years, writing the managed stuff because we're slowly introducing incremental support within codecs and whatnot, and performance has taken a long time to bring up
Sure.
to speed. But it was definitely the best decision I've ever made. I'm invested in what .NET can bring, and every time a new version of .NET comes, they've optimized a whole bunch of stuff
Yeah.
behind the scenes,
Yeah.
which means my thing suddenly has shaved 20 milliseconds off here or 10 milliseconds off
Yeah.
here, or there's a change in how matrices. There was a change for .NET 8, and I actually copied that change internally for a contributor did for the color matrix type that we've got. We copied the same approach. Tanimate changed matrix 4x4 and 3.2, and in certain circumstances made it 40 times faster for
Wow.
.NET 8, right?
Yeah.
I get
That's
that. I suddenly get that for free. It's
yeah.
magic. Like it's magic.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't, and I'll be the first one to say, like, I'm not very well versed in how images are created on different platforms, right? So, like, like I'm thinking of if I'm building, if I like maybe I need to build a PNG or I need to build a
Mm.
JPEG or whatever, right? Is it the construct the same on all the different platforms, or are things done a little bit differently, but the outcome ends up being the same?
No, no. Like I mean, the engineness of the file types themselves is baked into the specification, right? So you write it the one way and it works everywhere, right? And
Okay,
you let .NET deal with, file reads and all that kind of stuff.
sure,
You let the framework do all that. So I don't need to worry about that much. The only time I've ever had to worry about it was when I was saving with the fonts library. I was saving something as a read-only span of bytes so it was a compiler constant, and I needed to make sure that it worked. It was laid out the correct way because it's actually being passed as a unsigned integer. But that's the only time I've ever had to worry about anything like that at all. I just follow the specs, I read the things, I write it, and then it just works. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that. Obviously, it's incredibly bonkers complicated, but
sure, sure.
you write the same code, it works everywhere. Like that's the principle of it. It's a win. Like doing managed. doing it all in managed code is an absolute win for maintenance
Sure.
and future-proofing
Yeah.
everything. Like,
Well,
you
otherwise you're
know,
taking some downstream dependency on some like very crusty thing, right? Like something
yeah,
that
yeah,
hasn't probably been touched in 5 or 6 years, and if something comes along that breaks it, like good luck, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, I know Giflid hasn't been touched. I mean, maybe it's complete, maybe it's feature complete, maybe that's fine, and that happens a lot. Things are feature complete, right? You can not do anything else to change this or improve these things. That does happen, right? Um, that's not changed in 5 years. I know that. Um, the fellow that was maintaining libpng, which turned out was basically one guy, he died. Like,
yeah,
he died, and that's awful. But then people moved in to take over. But what people don't realize is these things were built years and years and years ago, and most of them aren't maintained much.
yeah,
Like JPEG Turbo is basically one guy, running it all, and that's used by everything, right? All of the browsers use that, all the stuff. They all use this stuff. Um, but it's only one or two people in all these places. I don't want that dependency on that.
sure.
Um, because I don't want to put them. I felt that pressure,
Yeah,
right? I
yeah,
don't want to put that on someone else. So I never wanted that risk. And I wanted that cohesiveness. I wanted that completeness as well. And also I wanted to see whether I could. I like a good challenge, and I wanted to
sure.
see whether it was possible. I was
Yeah,
told a long time ago, by someone a lot cleverer than me, which kind of worried me at the time. He said, "This isn't going to work. You can't do this."
okay.
And thankfully, it did. But
You're wrong.
I
Whoever
really
you
doubted
are, you're
myself at the
wrong,
time. But
right?
I'm not going to name names. But
No, of course.
he knows who he is.
Yeah,
Uh,
of course, of
but
course.
and he actually said a few years later, I was wrong, but I thought, oh
Yeah,
God, maybe you're right. But yeah, so back to your question. Um, yeah, I started doing this stuff because I was very community minded, very
yeah,
community. I thought it would be something that the community could do together,
yeah,
and it didn't really kind of happen. It just
yeah.
turned into something. But I'm incredibly stubborn, and I thought I'll
Sure.
just keep going. And it was interesting. It really is. I find it incredibly interesting. I've learned so much that I forget that people don't understand a lot of it.
Yeah,
Or no, not understand. No, there's a difference between knowing and stuff. They just don't know it because they're not exposed to the
sure,
underlines.
sure.
I'm so interested in it, and I've learned so much that I don't appreciate that people don't. But there is still so much for me to learn. Like there's so much for me to learn still, and I've got this desire to learn and do more. I still need to learn about color profiles and how all that really works.
Sure,
Like
sure.
that's scary. I've been putting that on the sideline.
All right. Well, we're back. Thank you, James, for bearing with us and trying to figure all this out. So what though I don't remember exactly when you cut out, but we were kind of talking about the maintenance of open source,
Yeah.
especially around ImageSharp, right? And one of the things I'd love to talk with you a little bit about, like at some point, like you were building something for kind of yourself, right? Or you saw a gap and you wanted to kind of build it, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And you know, you mentioned that the community wasn't like you wanted to build something the community kind of worked together and it didn't really happen the way you wanted to. What instead happened, and you can probably tell the story better than me, is that people realized like, oh, like the way James is doing it is like a really, really good way to do it. So we should kind of all use this. What was that
Mhm.
experience like for you when you realized that like, oh, people are kind of becoming dependent on stuff that I build myself or I maintain myself?
Yeah, and there's a few people that have
Sure.
massively
Yes.
helped over the year. I've got a point that say that there's some absolutely amazing people who've kind of stuck by me through the last 5, 6, 7 years,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I consider them core. They've been incredible, and they have contributed so much time and effort and incredible knowledge to the library. None of this is on my own. I must say that straight off. But yeah, I mean, it got popular. It started to get popular pretty quickly. Um, Even back like as far as like 2017, it was starting to get noticed. I remember it turned up in a keynote for something, I think maybe build or something like that. It turned up in a keyword there or something
Okay.
in a keynote there. And folk were starting to get really interested. And I was excited about that because I still thought, yeah, we'll get contributors now.
Yeah.
So I was really hopeful for that. And then it got featured in a blog post that people keep reading for some reason, even though it's a million years old. Kind of comparing it with a bunch of other um, imaging libraries at the time,
Sure.
and we were like
Sure.
in it was like a beta, and people still read it, and they shouldn't. But uh, so it got more popular then. So yeah, people started downloading this, and people started using it in production environments, and it was not ready to be used in
Sure.
production
Sure.
environments.
Yeah.
That really
Yeah.
scared me. It really scared me at the time, actually, because I was like, and then people started repackaging it because I kept it in like as releasing it as a pre-release and marketing it as a
Mm-hmm.
pre-release. And UGet was like, this is a pre-release. People don't use it in production.
Yeah. Sure.
And
Sure.
they'd take my library, they'd fork it, they'd publish it with like a final release number, a
Yeah.
stable release number. And then people would download. I'm like, no, please don't do this.
Please.
This
Yeah.
will
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
your computer crash. Like, um, so yeah, it got started to get popular. And uh my life has changed a lot over the years. Like
Sure.
I've got a child now, and I'm married, and I've moved country and all sorts of stuff. From when I first started it was me tinkering in the bedroom on my own because I had time, right? Um, I had to put an enormous amount of hours into it,
Yeah.
enormous, and I still do. Right? I've got a day job,
Yep.
and I'm still working quite often till kind of midnight. I finish my work, I hang around with my family, put my daughter to bed, get back in front of the computer, start
Sure.
working.
Yeah.
So it takes an enormous amount of time. But yeah, as a maintainer, as me, I felt under a lot of pressure to make it work because it was now out there. I couldn't pull it back. I couldn't.
Yeah.
It's done. It's taken. There are dependencies on it, and I didn't owe anyone anything. That was the thing, though. Like I
Sure.
didn't.
Yeah.
It was Apache 2.0. It says in big capital letters in the license, as is.
Yep.
Like I didn't owe anyone anything, but there's a big expectation that people
Mm-hmm.
bring to you. I need
Yes.
this, and they
Yeah.
say I need as well. You're like, that's lovely. There's the
Yeah. Yeah.
code.
Yeah. Yeah.
Help me out, mate. But I don't like things that don't work that are built. Like I
Sure.
want that to
Yeah.
work as well.
Yeah.
So if
Take
there's a
pride
way
in
that
your
I
work,
think,
right?
yeah, like if I think that there's a way at all that I have the capability to do this, then I'll do it. Like I'll attack the problem and I'll do it. And I'll put pressure on myself to do so. So, it's got like 70 odd million downloads now. It's
Yeah.
massive. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
for what it is, it's not like when their libraries that dwarf it for downloads. But they're smaller, much less complicated,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
fulfill kind of standard business operations that people would use day to day. You know, so they're a lot easier to maintain,
Yeah.
right? There's still expectation, there's still pressure, but this is massive. I've chosen one
Sure.
of the most complicated things you could do,
Yeah.
and suddenly I'm maintaining that. So I've put in massive amounts of time to it, and it's lots of pressure and lots of stress. And that was why I started trying to monetize it really.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
yeah. And look, man, that led to a lot of stress as well. A lot of
Sure.
stress because like I'm basically working two jobs. I still work two jobs.
Sure.
I've got my day job and I've got my night job, right? And I'm putting in good hours into the
Into
night job
both.
on top of
Yeah.
my day job, right? And it's not like I should get paid for it as a thing, Yeah, you should pay people for it. But I put that out in the open first, right?
Yep.
It was my fault, right? I gave it a ridiculously permissive license, and people used the license accordingly. Um, but I just thought, like, if I am putting so much in, and I need money. Like everyone needs money, right?
Sure.
Life's expensive, getting much more expensive. So I need to find some way to compensate for myself for this effort that I'm doing, And I would love one day, like I actually really enjoy my day job. I work with fantastic people. It's an interesting field, very different from what I do in the night. But I like that. But eventually I'd like to move to doing this full time because
Sure.
it's become a passion.
Yeah.
Right. So I felt under so much pressure, and I didn't know whether to continue doing the work, even though I desperately wanted to, without trying to find some way to compensate. So that's why things like the license changes kicked in and stuff like that. And I really try my best to communicate. with the community, you know, how best to do this. I had a pinned thing for ages. Um, in the repo, I engaged people on Twitter and in Reddit when I used to use Reddit.
Yeah.
Um, and what I tried to engage people to try and make it as seamless as possible. And I eventually ended up with a license that is still ridiculously permissive.
Yeah.
Anyone
Like,
who isn't earning a huge sum of money a year gets it for free forever.
yeah.
I mean, right? And anything open source or source available, it doesn't even have to be OSI approved, source available. Any non-profit organizations, they get it for nothing. Like it's
Yeah.
incredibly permissive. And I'm not trying to fight a license war with people where I've got keys for things and stuff like that.
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
you produce a key, someone's going to hack it next week. And I'm not as
Yep.
clever as the people that are going to hack it, right?
Sure. Sure.
That's a guarantee. So I'm never going to enter that thing. I put all this effort in to try and monetize it now, to take some of the pressure off myself so that I can continue it. I don't want to ever abandon it, ever. I love it, right? As much as it's hard work, I love the field, I love the interest. I've
Yep.
managed to talk to, um, I get to talk to people who really know what they're doing as a
Yeah.
result of it, right? Some
Sure.
incredibly clever people, and it's fantastic. I made good friends, online friends through
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So you know, I've, I've trying to monetize it now in order to be able to keep using it, and I still want to keep working in the
Yeah.
open. But there's still people out there,
Sure.
it's a rug pull, it's
Sure.
bait and
Sure.
switch,
Sure.
it's all this, and it that hurts. Honestly, it really does. It affects you. Kind of, yeah, it goes, because it's never been my intent. I'm just trying to keep it alive, keep it going,
Yeah.
and also not die of a heart attack because I'm trying to maintain the
Sure.
thing.
Well, let's just call out a couple of things, right? Like I looked this morning before we started, like, ImageSharp has 13,000 commits. Like you just recently passed 13,000 commits.
Yeah,
Think about that,
yeah,
right? Like, and not all of, like, some of those commits are, oh, like maybe you're upgrading a version of something, or maybe you're changing a doc file or whatever. But most of those are not trivial commits.
No,
13,000 is a lot, right?
it is, and I
So,
commit big as well. I commit big. Like I've got a
yeah,
nasty habit of not doing small incremental things.
yeah.
I'm like 60 files, bam,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
terrible.
but like, and we don't need to delve into this a lot if you don't want to, but like the
No,
idea, just to kind of summarize what James is talking about. So originally, the open source package ImageSharp that James built was using like an Apache 2.0 license. Basically, is like as is, use as you want. This is code, right? And you made a decision to change that to kind of like it's like a shift left license, right? Like it's a GPL sort of license, right? Which basically says it's still as is if you meet some criteria. You're a
yeah,
non-for-profit, you're an open source project, whatever, right? However, if you're a commercial product that is making over X amount of dollars in revenue, you need to pay a licensing fee, right?
yeah.
Is that fair enough to like what
Yeah,
you
yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
right?
yeah,
Yeah, so
it's
like
$1 million as well. It's a lot of
sure.
money. Like
Yes.
it's a, you
So
know,
yeah, so basically it's if you're using it for hobbyist projects or if you're using it in like non-profit scenarios, it is the exact same experience. However, if you're making money off of it
mm,
and your company is making money off of it, you need to adhere to the new licensing requirements.
yeah.
And I would like to get your thoughts as to, I imagine there was a lot of internal struggle about like what kind of license you should move to. Obviously, like, the pressure, like the pressures of, upsetting people or whatever, that's one thing. But like also like you still want people to use your thing, right?
Absolutely.
And if you go to down this path of using a more permissive license, like maybe you lose people completely. So like what was
Yeah.
kind of like your thought process around, what kind of licensing you should move to? And then obviously there's all the additional things you need to, like you had to leave the .NET Foundation, you had to do all these other things too, right? We don't need to talk about that, but
Yeah,
I'd love
please
to
don't.
yeah, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts as to like, what went through your head when you're like, okay, I've decided that I want to monetize this in some way. Chart the steps, chart the things that you thought about as when you went through that
Yeah.
process.
Well, originally I thought, well, maybe I can keep it open,
Yeah,
completely open,
sure.
and I can sell support. Now,
Yeah.
the problem is,
That's a
right?
that's a that's a
Short
that's
myself.
a that's a path too. Like there's lots of
Yeah, yeah,
.NET
yeah,
open source projects that have like a revenue stream for like commercial support for sure.
yeah. Didn't work, right? Didn't work. And
Sure.
I'll tell you why, because I shot myself in the foot. I made something that was easy to use. So everyone can just use it. Oh yeah,
Sure.
dot
Yeah, yeah,
resize,
yeah.
done.
Yeah.
Oh, right. So it's dead easy to use. So people didn't need support. They don't need
Yeah.
support. If they want support, it's something really, it's usually someone wants something really complicated or exotic,
Yep.
which requires huge amounts of time and effort from me
Yep.
anyway. Like,
Yep.
so it just wasn't feasible. So I tried that and it failed. It did not work. I tried to do just a separate support license for commercial. Didn't happen. Nobody was
Mm.
taking it at all.
Sure.
Nobody. So I tried that. And that was the first thing I thought, all right, okay, I need to now make it so that people have to pay to play, right?
Yeah.
And that was a hard decision to make, right?
Yeah.
That was a hard decision because I did, like, I put it out in the open, right?
Yeah.
That's something I put it out in the open, right? And I don't want people to see me. Like, I pretend I don't care what people think about me. And for
Sure.
those things, I don't care
Sure.
what people think about me, right? But I don't want to be seen as a villain, you know?
Sure. Sure.
I'm not a villain. I'm just a
Yeah.
guy trying to get this stuff done, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't want that impression of me. Um, so, and I appreciated. I didn't want to hurt people who were already dependent on me, that were already putting their stuff in public.
Yep.
You know, they made that same decision. They've said, my code is open source, right? I don't want my stuff that they're depending on to become a liability. So I made sure that the change that I was doing, I wanted to make sure the change that I was making never negatively affected anyone who was, could be
Yeah.
negatively affected it. So that was why the license is so permissive. And that, there's nothing in the license, right, that protects me from people doing bad things, right? Nothing, right? Somebody could fork it tomorrow, right? Change, and that's a fork now, and then just release that kind of, under their own thing. It's or they could build an open source library, right?
Yeah.
That just wraps the whole thing in a
Sure.
a
Sure.
static class that goes blah 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 dot image sharp dot, right? There's nothing to stop a bad actor doing that,
Yep.
right? But they're going to do it anyway. Like whether I did, whether I had the
Sure.
license or
Sure.
not, it's that bad people do bad things. So,
Yes.
so
Yep.
there was no way for me to stop that. So I left it. I left the license as open as possible, and I chose specifically to do so because I didn't want to hurt the people that could
Yeah.
get hurt by it. But I also needed to make sure that the people who should pay, who are using it, um, well, the people who can afford to pay, not should pay, people who can afford to pay and who are making profit off it. I wanted to make sure that they are obliged to
Sure.
pay under the
Sure.
rules. They should pay.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know. I don't know about compliance, right? It's
Yeah.
hard to enforce that. It's hard to check. It's hard to do anything. And you know what? I can see the numbers downloading. NuGet doesn't provide me with the stats any, which is appalling, really. If you're doing a package manager, you should probably find a way to make sure that people can track usage properly, and where, whatnot. But people aren't compliant. I know that from the numbers. I know
Sure.
that from the numbers, but some are now, and I'm hoping
Yeah.
that there's a bit of a mental shift over the next few years to make sure that people become more compliant and more people will do. Because we've had a few libraries now, Identity Server really started it all,
Sure.
and uh, there's a few big things now that have made this change. So I'm hoping that the ecosystem will shift slightly so people understand, that it can't just be take, take, take. You have to give something back. You have to help support the people, that are
Yeah.
supporting you, you
Sure.
know. So it was a heavy decision to make, but it was a necessary decision to make.
Yeah.
I had to make this change, or else the project has to go away. It has to get shelved. I can't, I've got a wife, I've got kids, I've
Yeah.
got responsibility. I'm not getting any younger. Um, right? I
You
need
look
to go to
great
bed a bit
still.
earlier at night than I used to, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if I didn't do it, the project would die. And people
Sure.
say, "Oh, we'll fork it and take over." You know what? They said that when I changed the license, and not one person did.
No, of
Not
course
one
not. Of course
person
not.
carried on because people take a look at it and realize how difficult it all is, how much effort and how much. There's a reason that I'm doing it, and it's not because it's the thing's easy. The reason I'm making that change. If it was easy to maintain, I'd just maintain it. I wouldn't bother trying to
Yeah.
monetize it. It'd be easy.
Well, yeah, I think of it like this, right? So, I looked to get like I was curious, before we got started. Like I took a look at
Mm,
like some of your Git numbers. Like you have 13,500 other repos that use your
mm,
repo, right? You have
mm,
like
mm.
800 some odd like packages that exist in NuGet or miscellaneous tools that depend on your repo
Yeah.
in your package, right? Like those are usually folks that are in the open that are trying to do things. Like those folks aren't affected by this. It's
Yeah.
about just trying to look. I think it's a fair requirement of anybody, and this isn't just to you, this is to like any project that's doing something that is being used by big companies. Big
Mm,
companies can do two things. They can give you contribution, they can help you
mm,
write code for whatever, right? Or they can give you money, right?
mm,
I've been very open about this for a long time. Like
mm.
those are the two ways to for a big company that's using open source to move. If they don't, that's a problem. And this isn't just a
Yeah.
tech. This isn't a tech company thing. Like the big tech companies of the world, they do their due diligence. They sponsor projects. They try to have full time. Like if it's something they're dependent on, they have full timers that will actually help.
Mm,
With
mm,
things. But like it's the other industries, like the banking industry, like the media industry, like they're building line of business applications or even applications that are
mm.
making them revenue, but tech isn't their area of focus. Those are the companies that we need to pressure to
Yeah.
contribute to projects, right? Because like tech is going to do what tech does. Tech is going to try to take care of tech to an extent.
Yeah. Yeah.
But these other companies that are just using it because they see you as something is not having to reinvent the wheel, like that's a problem,
Yeah.
right? And another thing that I think is really interesting is like it's not as simple as changing the license too, right? You had to spin up a business.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
so
So there's
like
cost in that,
yeah, like talk about that a
yeah.
little bit. Like I imagine when
I
you first
mean,
started going through this process, you're like, okay, like I'm gonna change the license, and then you realize like, oh, I really just can't change the license. Like I have to
no.
spin up an LLC or spin up a business and move the IP to that business. Like talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that because I
Yeah.
imagine
Like
it's something
so.
you weren't
So
expecting.
well, I mean, thankfully, Australia is really good for this. Actually,
Okay,
in the UK, if you want to set up a business, my God, it's a hassle. It's an
sure.
absolute hassle. You got forms. It took me. I was doing some contracting work before I moved across to Australia, and to set all that up took months. Honestly, months to get the
Yeah,
bank account and everything sorted. In Australia, you can get the bank account sorted in like an hour. It's a couple of button pushes and they trust you and everything just works. But you've got to set up the business. You've got to get your tax file number. You've got to,
yep,
and then there's tax implications upon what you're doing. You've got to find someone who can handle international, um, payments and whatnot.
yeah,
So I've got a merchant of record. I use a company called Paddle, who are very good. And they provide my checkout and they do all they handle that checkout process and the tax, and they sort out GST, goods and service tax in
yep,
Australia, and deal with all that complicated stuff there. Um, so that I thankfully don't need to think about that, but I still do need to think about that, right? Because I still have to pay goods and service tax one, but I still have to we still got income tax upon anything that gets introduced. So there's a management on that and making sure that you know my day job and like I'm because my day
yep,
job I get taxed very heavily, because of the other
sure,
thing as well, right?
sure,
So um yeah, I got to make sure I maintain the company and refresh it and whatnot as well. You've got these overheads and that. Now, anyone who runs a company does this, and then they might be poo-pooing the fact that it's complicated. But for me, yeah, it's complex.
sure,
Not a comfort zone at all. Like managing
yeah,
all this stuff and then going to my accountant every year to go, okay, and now there's this that comes from these people
yep,
and blah blah. And it's not much money I'm pulling in at all from it. I will be honest, right? I'm really not. It's not great at the moment, but I'm hoping,
yeah,
over time because it's still very early doors. I'm hoping over time it could be,
yep,
something I can depend on. Um, but it is a lot of effort. There's a lot of effort
yeah.
being that business, putting that, setting it all up, and then hoping, there's a hoping it all works.
Yeah, and
So,
I mean, and that's just like one thing, right? But like you also
mm,
all have kind of like the buy me a coffee sort of contribution method as well, like use Open
We do,
Collective or
yeah.
yeah, or GitHub sponsors to kind of get, that's obviously not the scale as like, hey, company that's making $1 million+ like give me some money,
Yeah,
right? Like, how has that experience been? Because I as somebody
yeah.
who, I'll just say it. Like I talked to James, what was it, like 7 or 8 months ago? Like like when I worked at AWS, we sponsored
Hmm.
ImageSharp because it's great and ImageSharp should be sponsored by big tech companies, right? Um, like how has that experience been? Like, it's $5 here, $10 here. I imagine that makes you feel good because people like these are individual folks usually that are going out of their way to kind of show you that they appreciate the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and you know what? That's magic. There's no need for them to do that. It's awesome. It is. It's really nice. Like there's no other way to describe it. It's a wonderful altruistic act. It's beautiful that people do donate and do that stuff. Do that. But I don't believe it should be on the individual. Like,
Sure.
if an enterprise organization for whom the license fee is a rounding error, you know,
Yep.
for them, their devs shouldn't be their devs shouldn't be paying for that
Yeah.
out of their pocket, right? They shouldn't be. The company should be paying for that. I'm sure they spend more wining and dining someone, than they
Sure.
would on the license. I'm sure they would um, you know, it should be on the companies to deal with this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely eternally grateful for anyone who's ever contributed anything to the library. It could be as small as the library's a spelling error, right?
Hmm.
Great, fantastic.
Yep.
Anyone who ever contributes to documentation is a hero as far as I'm
This
concerned,
is true.
because I
This
hate
is true.
writing that stuff, right? I hate
Yeah.
it. Because I'm so deep in it that I can't write that open thing easily. I find it very difficult
Yeah.
to write naturally. Um, Fiscally, they contribute, there's people, $2 a month. It's $2 of their money that they've
Yep.
earned, that they've worked for, that they've done them. Heroes, a lot of them as well. Like anyone who's done that individually, or even companies who've donated stuff, brilliant. Thank you. From the
Yeah.
bottom of my heart, absolutely. Thank you. But it should not be your responsibility.
Sure.
The companies should be paying for this stuff.
Yep.
They're the ones printing money. They're the ones, the big enterprise. That's the ones I'm thinking about. The ones that waste so much money through complicated procurement systems where there's like, they send you a checklist of stuff. You're like, wait a second,
Hmm.
you want my thing. Why am I? I'm
Yeah.
not signing my
Yeah.
life away for you. You want my business. Why do you expect me to fill in this big compliance thing? Like I know they're protecting their interests, but it's so archaic and convoluted that devs are now scared to even ask because they don't want to go through a 4 month procurement process,
Sure.
right? And then they pay those few dollars themselves, or they don't even raise the thing and they just use the library anyway,
Yep.
right? We need a shake up in the industry to improve that procurement process,
Yeah.
right? And some companies seem to go well with it. They do. Like some companies, they just seem to tick the boxes and hand over the money. Other companies, unfortunately, it seems to be mostly American companies. They're the ones who are like, they want me to sign paperwork about equal opportunities hiring and stuff like that. I'm like,
Yeah.
I can't hire anyone.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
haven't paid
Yeah.
me.
No, that's yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah. No,
Like,
that's
what are you on about?
yeah. No, that's. I mean, good. I think it's good that they require
Yeah, no, it's
that.
good
But
that
at the
they're
same
standards.
time,
They don't
like
want to be
read the
they don't want to
room.
be buying from evil. Yeah,
Yeah,
that,
like
like,
read the
like
room a little bit, right? Like
yeah.
James
Mm.
in a couple of his cohorts are
Oh.
schmucking this thing. Like no opportunity has ever came across your head. It's like, oh, like I need to hire somebody. Like I need to
No.
hire somebody. And then like if you do, like you're a good guy. So you probably like I want to make sure that I'm hiring like the right person and making sure that like
Absolutely.
I'm taking advantage of like all of the different people that exist in the world, right? But
Mm.
yeah. Anyway, that's
Yeah, it's too
cool.
complicated.
Cool.
But
Yeah.
no, I'm so grateful for anyone who has ever contributed anything in any form to the libraries over time. I think they're amazing people. They had no obligation to do so. But I do strongly feel that it shouldn't be down to the individual.
Yeah.
I think we need a proper mental shift in the industry overall, including tech companies, because I've had donation. AWS did do that fantastic donation, and Microsoft in the past have donated a sponsorship sum. Now that's gone into that open source pot, and I don't touch that ever.
Yep.
Right? That's for the other contributors. They can, the core team, they can use that for whatever they want to. I try to avoid touching that all the time because, I want to keep the business side of it separate
Yep.
from the open side of it, right?
Sure.
Um, there needs to be this shift in mentality. Enterprise needs to start paying, and they need to make it start easier for their developers to allow them to pay,
Yeah.
to pick up these projects and do that.
I don't
And that
dis
includes tech companies,
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think that you're seeing it recently, like you're seeing more and more open source maintainers saying, "Look, the time is now for folks to actually start to take care of the projects that they're dependent on," right? If you work at a large company. And you're seeing more and more of this, and you're seeing this groundswell of people that are, look, let's be real. If anybody is going to say, "Hey, open source maintainer, like you're the devil because all of a sudden you make companies like pay for your services," like those people are insane. Also, the people like they're the same, like the people like there are just two kinds of people in the world, right? In my opinion, in this regard, there are people that want to make sure that you feel like you are being well taken care of for the work that you're doing, right? And then there are other people that are very I'll just say this, they're selfish. They're like, this affects me in a negative way or could potentially affect me in a negative way. I don't like it. You're a horrible person. Like those people are not rational and it's not even worth engaging with those folks. Like, I mean, when this happened, however long ago it was, like I remember a lot of people saying, this makes sense. Like, I don't see any reason with, like, there were some people that might have been like, oh, I don't understand why or whatever. But at the end of the day, you can't, anything that you choose to do, it's your choice. And you're not doing it from any malicious point of view. Like, you could have easily just taken the code off of GitHub. You could have stopped publishing to NuGet and say, if you want the code, write me a check.
Yeah.
You could have done that. You could have, right? And you would have been within your right. You probably would have been a villain to a lot of people.
Well, I'd have felt like a villain doing that.
Yeah, but I
and
mean,
I would have,
like,
right? I think I would have been. Yeah, I would have hurt a lot of people that way. But
yeah. Let's move on to let's as we wrap up this conversation, let's move to something a bit more cheerful. And I want to talk about just like the community in general, right? Like we talked a little bit about like why you like .NET and the performance stuff. Like, what is it about the .NET community? Like, you've been a part of it for a while. Like, you're an MVP, so you engage the community a lot. Like if you looked at the last 10 or 15 years, like you've been in the industry working with .NET, right? Like, what's your opinion of, and how's the community like grown over that time, and why do you love it so much?
wow, yeah, it's funny. It's like there's kind of two halves to it, really, isn't there? There's like the active people, the talkers, the speakers, the people that you do get to engage and
Yeah,
chat with, and um, and then there's that silent group,
yeah,
that just get their head down and do it, and there's no reason for anyone to ever kind of engage in what we do outside their working hours at all. For many people, it's a job, and good on them. They've managed to separate their work and their life balance beautifully, and we've all failed horribly to do that. Um, so well done them. But there's that other side, that the people that like to chatter and stuff. And it's such a shame that social media itself is becoming so fragmented at the moment.
yeah.
Because that's really, from my perspective, kind of torn apart. I've lost people that I used to talk to daily, because they're on a different platform now that I might not be comfortable working with because the tech is, or I can't spread myself that thinly. You're on Mastodon, I'm on Mastodon, right? But I've yet to find a Mastodon client
It's
that isn't
hard.
awful. Like
Yeah,
like
it's
like
hard.
that isn't awful, right? And it does feel like I go on to .NET on that, and it's a bit of a ghost town. Like
Sure.
like
Yeah.
I'm online, everyone's away because there's so few numbers there. But now I'm finding less people are talking about .NET and whatnot. Well, personally, from my perspective, on Twitter, which I'm never going to stop calling Twitter, by the way. And I'm glad that you call it Twitter earlier as
Yeah.
well.
Why not?
Musk was an idiot. It's Twitter. X is a terrible name, right? It looks like a porno
Yes.
mag now, right? Right. It's Twitter. We tweet, right? Um, to my grave. Uh, yeah. So that's really dropped down, and that's sad. But look, I've made some great friends. Well, I mean, I call them friends, right? It's people that I
Yeah.
talk to, and I talk to
Yeah.
them almost every day, right? I've never
Yeah.
met most of them.
I
I've
talk
never
with my
met
wife.
most of them.
I chat with my wife about this all the time, right? Like,
Yeah,
I have to paraphrase like they're my friends, like they're people I talk
yeah,
to
yeah,
on the internet, and it's like it, it's hard because you'll probably never meet these people face to face,
yeah.
and when you do, it's like very weird, right? Like,
They're always taller than you think.
okay, so I'm not a very tall guy. Like I'm like 5'8". So that's the
Yeah,
first thing that I recognize with every single person I meet is how either how tall they are, how short they are. And
yeah.
my running joke is like it's so nice to like meet you from like the chest, like the neck down, right? Because
Mm,
everybody
mm,
sees like
mm.
you recognize somebody's
Yeah,
face, like or they're on
right.
video camera, right? Like it's always nice to like see people if see like an entire person, like because
Yeah,
it just
yeah,
means that it's real. Yeah, it is interesting. Like this idea of like you can be friends with somebody that you'll probably never meet. You talk about like one topic usually, or maybe a couple of
mm,
topics if you get close to that person. It is wild to me. And we spend more time talking to these people usually than we do with like our friends in real life, right?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
it is pretty
yeah.
wild.
Like, yeah. So I mean, the people I know online, I consider them friends anyway. And I've met some incredible people over the years. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's fantastic. And I think what I find is that most of the people that I end up chatting to, online a lot through these mediums and whatnot in the community, these people who kind of stand up and let themselves notice, they're always funny and clever and just down decent,
Yeah.
decent people. Like you meet them, like I had the privilege of going, I've only made it once, right? I'm desperate to go again. I went to the MVP conf, right?
Yeah.
It's nearly 4 years ago now. I'm
Yeah.
really hopeful that I can go to the next one. It's really expensive from Australia though. Like it
Yeah.
costs me, I'll be spending maybe $4,000 or something if I do it right.
Yeah.
Maybe even more, right? Um, I had the chance to do that, and it was one of the best weeks of my
Yeah.
life. Like
Yeah.
honestly, I got to meet people. My God, I was standing chatting to people who, like to me, I'm like,
Yeah. Sure.
and they
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
so down to earth and amazing and friendly and saw me as a peer, and I'm like, hey, you know how this stuff works.
Yeah.
I learned it in my bedroom. We're
Yeah.
not the same. like,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
they've done incredible things, and to meet these people for me, it's like, it's incredible. Um, but from a professional level, it's incredible to meet them, to see these incredible experts. But it's amazing on a personal level.
Yeah.
I've made friends. I've made real people that I can talk to, and that I'd do anything for. Real friends,
Yeah.
like good people from that. And I'm really hoping that I get that chance to go in, because there's people now that are MVPs that weren't before that I
Mm-hmm.
chat to all the time, and I want to meet them for real.
Yeah.
I'm desperate
Yeah.
to. And there are people that I have met that I miss. I'd love to see in real
Sure.
life again. I
Yeah.
talk to them, but I'd love to see them again in real life. Have a beer, have some fun. Just
Yeah.
just go out for dinner, just relax and do that. The community has really, in that respect, provided so much for me. In that area, like there are some really really good people out there, and
Yeah.
it's fantastic to get to chat to them. I just hope that, the fragmentation of social media doesn't accelerate or fall apart or something, so that
Yeah.
we don't drift. Like suddenly I'm on like, I've got a Blue Sky account, but
Yeah.
I've never used it. Like I've had a
Sure.
look, right? It's
Yeah.
empty, right? I've got Threads. Threads seems to have stagnated and not turned
Yep.
into anything, right? So I don't use it, right? Um, I got Twitter, and I've got Mastodon, and now I'm on Discord,
Yeah.
which confuses me horribly. Discord
Sure.
does,
Sure.
because
Sure.
every
Sure.
time someone tags you, you go, "Great, where is it?"
Yep.
And then I've never figured out a way. And if someone can teach me, somebody get a hold of me on Twitter and teach me how to find when immediately when someone's tagged me without me having
Yep.
to search for my own name in the
Yeah.
top right corner. If someone could teach me that, I'd be forever grateful. But I'm fragmented now, and I don't want it to
Yeah.
increase more. I don't want it to fragment more. I want to be able to go online and find the people that I want to talk to.
Yeah,
first time.
I could not agree with that more. I think that it is interesting that we're living in this world now where there was one option, and yeah, having only one option is kind of bad, but when that
Mhm.
option is good, it's great. But now you
Yeah.
have kind of like I don't want to have to go to I don't want to have to go to on some other social network to talk to like three or four people because they
Mhm.
refuse to be here, and like it's just the balancing act is too hard. And I totally
Yeah.
agree that
Yeah.
like it's nice to be able to chat with folks all in one place, but I do appreciate that sometimes that one place is not ideal, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to suck it up and make a Reddit account again one day.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Well, I
because I
mean
know that's
that's not
that's a
much better
vital thing for
either.
me. I
That's
know it's
not.
horrible, right?
Yeah.
Personally, I despise it, right? Because
Yeah.
there are good people who try the best on there.
Yeah.
But like, there's still people now, right? Because I go on and I do a keyword search, right? I'm not a member, but you can still search, right?
Yeah.
And I can search for image sharp on there, right?
Sure.
And there's sometimes good things, right? But there's always one person who says,
Everywhere. No matter where
um,
you go, there's
no, but
always
it
one
goes,
person.
it's not even like image sharp is rubbish, right? It's nothing, something blasé like that. It's always like, or haha, careful mentioning image sharp, or the maintainer will come and argue with you or something. No, I
Sure.
won't. Like, I won't. I don't care.
Well,
You
it's your
don't
right
need
to
to be.
argue with people
No,
anyway, right?
absolutely right. Right. I mean, if they're
Yeah.
being if they're being an arse on the internet, you know, I want to call them out for it. If they're spreading, FUD, I don't want them spreading FUD, right?
Yeah.
It's my baby. I'm protective of it, and I will be,
Sure.
right? And I
As you
always will
should
be.
be.
I do need to learn to, not take the bait so much, but I do need to start engaging on those platforms so that I can build more awareness. Like
Yep.
I'm not good at advertising what I do at
Sure.
all, right? Yeah, every so often I'll post a tweet of something that I'm like, whoa, look what I've done. And it gets a few likes and whatnot, but nobody really understands it. So it's not, I'm not good at marketing, but I need to get better at that so that I can kind of make it, in the business, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, so I need to engage on these things in a more professional manner, I guess.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll make two
and
accounts. I'll do like the business one, Six Labors,
sure.
where it's
Yeah, yeah,
all
yeah, yeah.
professional and nice,
You can
and
have
then
like
I've
a
got the one like
professional
yeah,
photo, and then you give a fun
yeah,
photo. Yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, this conversation has been great. I mean, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk a little bit about how you got started in tech and talking about your thoughts on community and the maintaining a very large project and kind of all of the fun things that come out of that. And I do like to kind of finish the conversation by kind of summarizing your thoughts on it, right? So like if you could
Mhm.
think of the conversation we've just had, we've talked about a bunch of things: open source, the community
Yeah.
around it, tech in general, right? Like, and if you were to think about this conversation that we've had, but you only had one or two words that came to mind when you think about that, what would those be for you?
Um, I guess we're talking about progressive change. That's all I think
Yeah,
really think about. It's progressive change. That's and a hope for it, I've got a hope, and I do believe in that it will happen. Um, I'm hoping in the a progressive change where we start looking after the tools we use.
sure.
No,
No,
that's it.
I totally agree. I mean, again, like you're saying things that make a ton of sense, and
Mhm.
I think it's only just a matter of time before these waves start to hit, right? And I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. Before we sign off, please, folks, if you're not following James on Twitter or other social medias, you can find him pretty easily. So he's on Twitter, James_M_South.
Mhm.
He also has a Mastodon, also has a GitHub. Please check out Six Labors, which is the company that James runs that is kind of setting up the different versions of ImageSharp, which you can find the
Mhm.
open source version on GitHub. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that before we sign off, my friend?
Um, I don't know, just trusted me. I'm
Yeah,
doing the right thing. I'm doing the right thing, and back it. Like just back it.
yeah,
Support your local graphics API
yeah, exactly,
producer.
exactly. That's
Like
we need to get you some signs printed.
yeah, that's it.
Well, this has been great, James. So much for taking the time to chat with me, and thank you for everybody tuning in as well. Either now or in the future. And this is Isaac Levin from Coffee and Open Source. I hope you have a great day. Take care.